Voilà, merci de vous installer. On va démarrer.
All right, so welcome again. We're about to start.
Voilà, merci de vous installer. Merci et bienvenue à ceux qui nous rejoignent. Je salue également ceux qui nous regardent en ligne. Pour ceux qui nous regardent en ligne, n'oubliez pas.
Okay, so hello again to those who are watching us online as well. Please do not forget to switch sessions, by the way, if you're watching us online, to switch to the next session. If you're watching us online as well, on the right-hand side, you have a column to express yourself. You can comment and ask questions if you want. And we're going to start this morning. We'll have probably a later lunch break anyways, and we will start immediately after the so just one piece of information, because a lot of you asked during the break. We're going to share the slides with you. We're having a look at how we can do that technically, but I think we'll send you the presentations via the email or via the app. But the presentations that were given here today at the field will be shared with you later down the line. I'd like to thank our speakers for accepting to share their slides. So after what was presented this morning, the challenges of the French automotive industry, we're going to talk about, how we can go for a successful transition. We've seen that this morning, and it's also what PFA is doing. PFA represents the automotive industry, and they contributed to the success of our event today. So I'd like to thank PFA for that. We have the managing director with us today, Marc Mortureux, who's the managing director of PFA. Thank you very much, Marc, for being here today. And you have the floor. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I'm going to try and go fast so that we may have a couple of Q&A later down the line. I will adapt also to the previous presentations, because some of what I had to say might be redundant. So PFA covers a lot of manufacturers, OEMs, and I'm very, very happy to be working today with the ARIA for the Hauts-de-France, and congratulations for everything that you have been doing throughout the period, which is particularly important, crucial even for the future of our industry. I'll now focus on what we're trying to do faced with the situation that has been described. How do we adapt and overcome? So here is, since 2018, we've been working on the move to electric with the supply chain contracts. We did know that the sales of EVs were going to be multiplied by 5 by 2022. We're on target for 2021 with more than 90,000 sales of 100% EVs for the first 8 months of the year. For rechargeable hybrids, we're above target with 90,000 as well sold since the beginning of the year. And overall, I think there's one figure that is quite striking. When you add all hybrids, full hybrids, especially Toyota ones, about a third of the market is now electrified vehicles. So it's taking off. It really is, and it's going to continue on that path. Maybe one element of information which I believe is quite important, when you have a look at the point of view of the consumer, which is important to take into account, this is something that we're doing regularly with Neuro Consulting, which is a consulting firm. You could see that the trends are quite favorable. The opinion is moving favorably, and people intend to purchase electric vehicles more and more often. You could see for 2020 right here, and it is still going in the same direction. Another interesting thing is that the people who do have an EV are quite happy with their vehicle, whether it be rechargeable hybrid, or full electric. So they have a better level of satisfaction, and they do intend to repurchase later down the line. There's a very high percentage of people who intend to stick to electric vehicles later down the line. I wanted to mention that today because it's an element that shows that it is a mega trend towards electrification. I just wanted to turn to, I think the acceleration framework was established this morning already, but there is one element, Europe wanted over the next 40 years to go for minus 40% of CO2 emissions. Over the past 10 years, we decided to go from minus 40 to minus 55%, minus 40% overall for CO2 emissions in Europe. It was already quite complicated. Now we've changed the goal quite close to the deadline as well. So it's quite complicated. And that's quite a question mark for all sectors. But for road transport, it's even more complicated. Since 1990, every vehicle put on the market emits less CO2 per kilometer. But we have so many more kilometers in Europe that we have had an increase of the CO2 emissions overall. So you can imagine if we really wanted to reach the minus 55% target within the next 10 years, the pressure is considerable. And this is why the European Commission has decided to go for the Fit for 55 package. It's been explained time and again this morning. I don't want to go through it again, but maybe sadly we have that 55% that appears in two different places that have nothing to do with one another. We have the minus 55% CO2 emission globally for Europe. This is the Fit for 55. But specifically for automotive, the minus 55% is also the goal. So between 2021 and 2030, each and every manufacturer will have to decrease their emission for new vehicles. In the package, we also have a certain number of interesting elements beyond the regulations, such as, for example, the wish to set up a carbon market for road transportation. What does that mean concretely? Well, it means that those who distribute energy for road transportation, including oil companies, will have some obligations to reduce progressively in the distribution of energy the carbon content. So we can go for more decarboned electricity or lower carbon fuels. And this is going to be at the heart of a certain number of debates. We know that public authorities have been hesitant. And very concretely, this is going to translate into an increase in the cost of fuel, which is a bit of a sensitive phenomenon. And there's another thing which has to do with the carbon adjustment mechanism at borders. And Europe has decided to go for a CO2 decrease rate that is quite consistent with what needs to be achieved globally. But the reality today is that Europe goes much faster than the rest of the world. So if we can't manage to protect ourselves, it's going to be quite complicated for us. So the French authorities are very, very motivated. We try to defend carbon adjustment mechanisms at the borders. It's very good, but honestly, what's on the table today is very concerning to us because as a downstream industry, so, steel, aluminum, and the rest, there's a real risk that we may discourage steel imports. And we may just purchase finished products, or so there is a whole package of decisions that have been made. I think that was presented by the European Commission on July 14th, and it is true that it's it's at the heart of a very hot debates at the moment. To come back to what was said, especially by IHS. On the left-hand side here, you have the energy mix for 2019-2020. Then we have the 2025 to 2030 scenarios. So we have three scenarios here. For 2030, the right-hand side scenario is quite close to what we were expecting for the 18 months ago at the beginning of 2020. So with the Green Deal, and with a minus 55% by 2030 and the end of anything that's not zero emission by 2035, this is what's on the table at the moment. And without that, we're on the left-hand side scenario with a 60% decrease. One of the advantages of the current situation is that we know more or less where we're going. There are some debates, but honestly, there's no need to wait for the results of negotiations for us to make progress and to make progress quickly and as fast as possible, actually, since, in the discussions, we are defending quite strongly the fact that, we have to make sure, deciding that 2035 will be zero emission only this is a bit of so batteries mostly, and also hydrogen. It's a decision we can make, but it's a bit of a question mark because there is a lot of uncertainty. But we've seen, as been mentioned, we can see that some manufacturers will accelerate their move to electric and hydrogen, given the fact that there are huge investments that they need to carry out. One last thing that has not been mentioned is the role of cities. This is also fundamental in the way that things are evolving, with also the low emission areas, the climate law at a national level. We have low emission areas for all cities with more than 150,000 inhabitants. There's a minimum deadline that has been set by law. There are some metropolises, especially Paris and the wider Paris area, that have decided to go for a much shorter deadline. And objectively, one of the main difficulties we have has to do with the end of all diesel vehicles by 2024, especially for utility vehicles. And I think that's a real question. And I think we will very soon reach the limits of the very, very ambitious objectives that we have set ourselves. This is not always in our interest. There are risks of, stop and go and going back and forth. And I don't think that's a clever thing. Anyways, what I wanted to share with you is that at PFA level, starting in 2018 and even more today, we know that we're going to move to electric. There's no debate. We're going to go this way. But there are a lot of question marks, and we need to help the industries, companies go through this very deep transformation. Fundamentally, we know that the decrease of the automotive production in France predates this change and predates this shift, let's be honest. Objectively, if nothing is done, there is a real risk that this transformation, or this forced transformation, will accelerate that decline even more. And what we believe, and this is what we're working on, is that it can be, if we make the right decisions, it can be an opportunity to seize. It can be an opportunity for us to get better. I also wanted to show you, we worked with Alix Partners. We're going to work on research until the end of November. And the idea concretely is to say, okay, we know how the automotive industry is going to transform. We know how concretely is going to, what it's going to mean in terms of items and so on and so forth. For rank 2, rank 3 suppliers, I think this is going to be quite complicated for them. There are some sectors that will undergo quite a strong degrowth, and they've been working quite a lot also on determining what opportunities can be seized. There are such opportunities, and we can indeed be successful and maybe create even more opportunities based on those. So here is the average content of a vehicle per component. So on the right hand, in red, you have the different values for the vehicles. The numbers are outside of the assembly of the vehicle, and then you have the different subsidiaries or sub-supply chains. So what's going down, what's going up. So this is the first point. How can we support those who will have to go through the negative impacts, and how can we help the companies that are really growing quickly as well? This is very important. Another element is that you can see these are the values for 2019, and the 15,000 euros for an ICE for a thermal vehicle is 15,000 euros, 23 for an electric vehicle. So this forced transition, again, the manufacturers have put a lot of pressure on prices, on costs, and this is one of the elements that are of concern to us. There is a risk that it may become more and more difficult for some items and components to be supplied from France or to be sourced from France. So that can be a problem for France and for Europe in a more general manner. And the manufacturers will have to start building some things internally as well in-house, because they will have to convert their manufacturing sites, and that will have a consequence on the volumes on the market. So we're working very concretely on those themes. We have worked, and of course, hand in hand with ARIA, with competitivity, centers and so on and so forth to have the right image, the right snapshot of what the industry looks like today. We've had a look at what their position was. Here you have it by region. Here you have it with the different subsidiaries for subcontractors, different supply chains. I don't want to go into detail here, but we're working on that. And there's another thing that I'd like to tell you for those of you who are interested as well. We're going to have a remote workshop on the 29th of September, I believe, and we're going to share with you the first steps of this research. Again, the idea is for us to support the companies and to support ARIA members, especially in order for them to know better how to position themselves, how to validate the right models in order to be very operational. So we know that the context is complicated. France produces a lot of thermal engines. It's been mentioned before. We produce more thermal engines than we assemble cars, so it's a bit more than 60,000 employments. So we know that there's going to be loss of employment. We have possibility to create jobs, but it's only a potential. And this is really what's at stake, and this is really what we're working on. We want to determine how we can make sure that these potential jobs actually are created.
And this is my last slide to open up the debate, actually, in the challenges of the automotive industry, and this is complex. That's probably what you're living on an everyday basis. We are in a context of conjunctural context difficulty that's quite heavy, because when we see today, overall, the economy has recovered, the industrial streams have gone back, but aeronautics and automotive industries are really lagging behind. We can see that the bad surprise, the increase in the shortage of semiconductors, extremely difficult dialogue between we don't know, stop and goes, with this factory stopping for a couple of days, and then how it influences the rest, the increase in raw material, the increase in the price of energy. So there is a tension on this. A market, as we said, for the second year in a row, is going to be very low and below the low points that we've had. So the context is very heavy, even though earlier this year was better. And in parallel, probably this is the industry that is more structurally impacted, because faced with the incredible challenge of lower carbon emission, there is a solution for mobility. So we're actually putting the emphasis on this in Europe. And therefore, our reasoning, and this is the point of the roadmap that we are worked on and we presented this afternoon by McKinsey, because we work with them, is that to say, in any case, it has started, and within 10 years, we'll have massive investment to adapt. What is the share of these investments that we can capture here on our territory in the various regions of France? And Hauts-de-France region is a territory that really has a role to play very clearly. What is the share that we can capture? So we've had a whole work that we presented to give ourselves a certain ambition in the shares we want to capture. And then we presented the fact that electrification would be favorable more to Germans and not so much to the French. Is a very interesting thesis on that. On the other hand, we have decarbonated electricity that is a true asset. And the fact that this factor doesn't enter into the location of the gigafactories that use a lot of electricity to manufacture batteries. So companies take into account the carbon footprint. Is not so much the transport, but the place where the parts are manufactured. We have processes that are energy consuming very clearly. If we take this to account, France has a major asset. And how can we use that? So investing massively. And then one of the main difficulties we have, and we are talking with the authorities with new announcements for support as part of the investment plan. Difficulty we have is that it's great to support the investments to be made in CapEx. It is necessary. But if we don't solve the issue of the competitiveness hindrance of the French side, so the lower production taxes is our first stage. But very clearly through the testimonies we've heard, there is a requirement to go further if we want to make companies choose France compared with the international competition. So this is an important point. Supporting companies and the workers, as we said, is just a major, major challenge for retraining the workers. And then we have, of course, the questions of infrastructure. So it is, of course, for the recharging stations where we talked about hydrogen, it is also a major topic. And we have to be careful about that. The electric batteries must have alternatives to batteries. And there's a true question in the way the public authorities will create the conditions to allow for a rolling out of this infrastructure, including hydrogen with this safety aspects. So these are major topics. So you will have a presentation this afternoon on all that. And I've tried to be as short as possible in this presentation. Thank you very much, Marc Mortureux, giving us the objective of this roadmap, which really talk about the feel, the agenda, and then we talk about the network of charging stations and the competitiveness. Now you have the floor. You probably have a question for Marc Mortureux representing PFA. Yes, Fabien, you're going to get a microphone representing CNPA. Do we have a microphone? Here we go. In the meantime, and something I didn't say actually, is that for the time being in the European Commission, there is no questioning of the mass factor that was really well described, which could, of course, raise some questions. Good morning, everyone. I'm Fabien Degan, chairman of CNPS, so the National Trade Union for the Automotive Industry, which is the downstream. And you're probably talking about the upstream aspect, but we cooperate together. What I meant to say is that in addition to what you presented, I totally agree on the multiple solutions, because electrification of the whole fleet is really a concern for me, really a real concern, whether it's for upstream or downstream. I'd like to say that in the items that you mentioned, I would like probably add an element, which is the assurance of getting the raw material. Because as we speak, I don't know, I saw a study on this, I think it needs 20 times more cobalt in the future. So as we speak, who has these cobalt or raw materials, rare raw materials? It's mainly in China who have taken the decisions. I met a colleague who said that they are taking shares in foreign countries, and it is the Chinese who have this, and we're not in a position to go further than that. So it's going to become complicated. So I think that we should add in your roadmap, how can we? Otherwise, the semiconductor crisis, what is going to happen? We're going to have a crisis of the manufacturing of batteries because we won't have enough rare earths. You're right. It's interesting what's happening today. We have the power electronics as well. There's going to be a major access for investment because we can see that the requirements will be enormous and there are risks. You're right, the raw materials. For your information, there is a mission that's just been entrusted by the Ministry of Industry to Philippe Varin on this. So they've been worked on with a number of solutions to reduce the dependence, but these are absolutely major challenges, and we have to learn the lesson of the most sophisticated supply chains. And the problem we've known during the summer with Malaysia, I've discovered it. Thank God other people knew about it, but each time the chain is more sophisticated than we know. It was Taiwan, and now we don't see this vulnerability of globalization, but you're right to underline that. It's a major aspect. Working on the resilience of supply chain. Very quickly, Fabien? They've cut your microphone then. It's now back on. No, I just wanted to add the importance, and as you mentioned, of the distribution network, especially the battery chargers, because we are lagging behind so much. We're not the last in Europe, but from the moment that we want to transform it in the dealership, people don't know what to buy. And this is very dangerous. Thank you. Thank you, Fabien Again, who represents the Dealers Association, Auto Dealers Association. I'm going to take a question online. Can you show me one? So, should we fear a massive arrival of Chinese cars since they are ahead of us on electric vehicles? Well, we've actually analyzed that very objectively. We can see that the penetration of Chinese vehicles is very low today, but we can see that the market share of Chinese vehicles in EVs is much higher than thermal engines. So they master the whole chain, including the digital aspects. They're very good for the automation and so on. It is true that it's part of the major concerns we have, whether under Chinese brands or European brands manufactured in China. Because one of the major concerns in manufacturers is that prices will go up, especially for manufacturers who are not premium manufacturers that were positioned on entry to middle of the range. So the impact of electrification is much higher and raises true questions about the risk of seeing the market reduced. So it is, yes, part of the concerns. And I was thinking about the carbon adjustment at the borders, which doesn't answer this question. So there is a pressure on prices, Marc Mortureux, and we'll come back to that on a round table tomorrow on the customer supplier fashion. And Thomas Sapardi, you'll have a last question, and then we'll talk about hydrogen. I will try to make it quick. Thank you for this presentation that was comprehensive and rather encouraging to take into account. Add three quick questions. First point, 70,000 jobs is 1/3 of the jobs left in France. So the pace of